All right, well, I want to welcome everybody to today's webinar presented by KaiNexus. I'm Mark Graven, a senior advisor with KaiNexus, and today's topic is 6 key steps to create a culture of improvement. And we're joined today by Scott Bergmeier. He's going to be our presenter. He's executive director with IQC, and I'll introduce him a little bit more formally here in just a second. So with that, let me introduce, again, we are joined by Scott Bergmeier. He is the executive director of IQC. He's worked and consulted in manufacturing, technology, education, and healthcare industries for over 30 years. In his professional career, Scott has held roles such as QA manager, CI manager, organizational development, human resources, and was a SVP of quality and improvement, and was also a chief improvement officer. Scott is a lifetime learner, professor, speaker, and author of multiple books, articles, and journal publications. Scott is a master black belt, and he's the creator of the DMAIC Way. And his goal is for everyone to make it better, make it stick, as we see over his shoulder there. So with Scott, welcome, and thank you so much for presenting today.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. No, I'm so happy to be here, and it's great to see. I see still people coming in, someone from Manchester, and I'd have to say Manchester United is not playing well this year so far. So, Dave, if you're a Manchester United fan, I'm sorry, they're not playing well. So anyway, with that, I'm so happy to be here to share with you a culture of improvement. And as Mark said, I'm the executive director of IQC. And just for a moment, just to talk about who we are based in Iowa. And our focus is really to be a catalyst to transform individuals and organizations. We do that in 3 primary ways. So we do training. So we have a number of things that we do training on: Lean, Six Sigma, Baldrige, organizational development, strategy, lots of things. We also do consulting. So we'll work directly with organizations. And then we do oversee the Baldrige Performance Excellence process for the state of Iowa. And our whole goal is to be on the journey with organizations and individuals as they kind of learn and grow along the path. Mark talked about who I am, so we're just going to blow by that. And it's really, I think, as we dive into some of the content, I do like to make it a little interactive, so definitely throw your questions in the Q&A, but there may be a couple times I say, hey, I may ask you a question to pop in the chat, so please do that. And if you happen to throw a question in the chat and versus in the Q&A, we'll manage it and figure it out. But ideally, hit those questions in the Q&A.
So I'm going to throw one question at you real quick, because I read in the bio, and maybe you can elaborate real quickly. The DMAIC Way with the registered trademark symbol.
Yep. So what that is, it is a framework. Early in my improvement career, I was introduced to Six Sigma, and what some people may or may not. I'm actually a chemist by training, so my undergraduate and first graduate degree was in chemistry, and I was a researcher, and I worked in a lab, and I thought my career was going to be, managing a lab and testing and all kinds of things. And then quality manager said, hey, come learn this thing called DMAIC, Six Sigma. And I learned that. I thought, oh, this was really cool. So then I started getting into it and got my black belt. And probably about 10 years in, what I learned was the traditional way that we teach people process improvement or Six Sigma Lean in the traditional sense really didn't work, and it turned people off. And so we created this methodology that does 2 things. It, in plain English, it teaches people the thinking process of improvement. And it's framed around DMAIC, define, measure, analyze, improve, control. And so we have several field books and books around that, and that is the framework we use to teach white belt, yellow belt, green belt, and black belt in that methodology. And what we've really found is people using that, based on our data so far, is they actually get certified and they get their projects done 30 to 40% faster than the traditional. So, and thank you. Yes, going from science to operations has been lovely. So for you, while where I see everyone's getting pretty used to the chat, if you would, just for a moment, if you were to just write a couple words or a quick sentence about culture, what is it? How would you define what is a culture?
And we might, yeah, so people, yeah.
Yeah, drop right in the chat.
Analysts, there you
So
go.
it's collective behavior, it's norms, yeah, set of norms, a mindset. It's ingrained, yeah, what people see or say about your company, yeah, the way people do it. And many times what I hear people talk about culture is it's really how people act when no one's watching. Yeah, and someone just said that. Awesome. Galaxy S10 Plus. That's a really unique name, so very cool. And so, yeah, it really is how do people act when no one's watching? And as you're in this chat, if you would, just a quick question. So we kind of have this culture, what it is. Why do we want to spend time building it? So what is the purpose of actually building the culture? And if you want to just drop that in the chat. So we know culture is that norm, the way people act when no one's watching. It's about sustain. So if we really build it, and I love your answers, you're spot on. It's how you achieve the vision. It's how you communicate for common goal, get expected results. It kind of pushes us in a direction. And so what I have found in my work is there are 6 very specific steps to build a culture of improvement. And many times organizations spend time talking about, hey, we want to build a culture. We want to do culture change. And what I'll tell you is what's funny is culture change is really easy. I can actually do that for you tomorrow. And whenever I ask, CEOs or executives say, well, what do you mean? You can change my culture tomorrow? Yes, I can. There's 2 ways to change a culture, evolution or revolution. So if you want to change it tomorrow, what you do is you go fire everyone in your company and you say, here's the culture we want. And then you only hire the people that align and fit in that culture. And what's funny is no one ever wants to do that. So then we have to then evolve. We have to do evolution, which then takes time and purpose and effort. And so it really isn't just this magical thing you snap your fingers, because snap your fingers is too painful. And so to do this, really building this culture of improvement, we're going to talk about each one of these 6 steps. When we are purposeful around these 6 steps, we can achieve great things. The thing to remember is we cannot do it at the snap of a finger or at this immediate, like right now, magically we're there. And it is an evolution over the course of some amount of time. And depending on the size of your organization, the complexity of the organization, how change ready they are or not, just takes that time and extends it or shortens it. And so that's the thing to remember when you're really trying to build this culture of improvement. It's really a mindset, and it's really about how do you do it over the course of time. And if we're thoughtful and planful about it, we can do great things. So the first part of this step is really that center part. And it's really then building that vision. And what happens is when we say, hey, we want to be a culture of improvement, or we want to undergo this performance excellence or improvement methodology, people say, no, right, go do improvement. Yay. And what happens is we don't really talk about what is that vision and how will people act or how will people behave? What's currently happening? And what do we want to happen? What will people do different? How will leaders behave different? What processes are going to be impacted or not impact? And then at the end, what will the business see? Will it see reduced costs? And if you're just doing an improvement to reduce cost, as many of you know, you're kind of missing the boat. And we also have to speak the language of business. So as improvement professionals, we can't not speak the language of business. We can't not talk about the impact in business language. We can say, yes, it made it easier, or customers are more satisfied. If we can't tie that to a business result, and that's not part of the vision, we actually likely in the future will miss out on opportunity, or we'll miss out on really building a united culture. And so this vision is really about comparing where you are today and where you want to be, and what steps are you going to take between that. And I always think about is I'm building a bridge, and I'm going from one side of the river or the stream to the other. And where I am today versus getting to the other side, when I build that bridge, I have to put in these planks, and those planks are the steps in the process to get to that end result. We can really do that whether we're talking improvement or strategy. The thinking or the methodology is kind of the same. So it's really important to kind of build that vision and have that idea of where do we want to go. The second thing that we have to do once we've built the vision is we then have to identify a framework. And when you think about the framework, if you go and Google search continuous improvement or improvement framework on Google, you get millions of examples. And if you just look at the images, there are millions of examples out there. There's common ones: Lean, Six Sigma, Lean Sigma. I've seen one recently called Extreme Sigma, and I haven't found much on it. And all I can think of is people doing Six Sigma while they're jumping out of an airplane or something. And so it's kind of interesting when you think about all of these methodologies. And what we really want to think about when we identify that framework is, I typically recommend pick one. Make it as visual as you can, make it as easy and as plain English as you can, and then ensure that there's some cycle or steps, whether it's 5 steps, 4 steps, 6 steps, whatever that is. Right now, I'm seeing a trend in many organizations where, yes, they're using PDSA or PDCA, and they're starting to sprinkle in Six Sigma and DMAIC. And when you talk to the frontline staff, they're starting to get a fatigue, like what improvement methodology. So we used to do PDSA, now we're doing DMAIC, and sometimes we do this. And that's where that framework gets confusing, and it's hard for people to connect the dots to say, what do we have to do? And it's not that any one is better than the other. Yes, I do, Six Sigma and what I would say is more Lean Sigma than I do Lean from a pure methodology perspective. Now, some people will say, well, Lean is the best. Some people say, well, Six Sigma is the best. Some people say, well, I learned Six Sigma at Motorola or GE, and that's the best of the best. Pick one. Begin to use it and refine it. And at the end of the day, actually, if you lay them out next to each other, it's the same thinking process. And when you really reflect on what is improvement is the thinking process of getting better. And it's applying tools and methodologies to that thinking process to get better. And if we get too stuck on this one way or this other way, then people feel like improvement is being done to them instead of with them. And I see some of the notes, people are saying simplest is the key. Yes. One common language, as simple as possible, people will connect it, and truly they'll do great things. They'll grab it and go. And so once you've identified that framework, then it's really around commonizing as much as you can around that framework. And if you have to change the framework because you learned something along the way, that's totally okay. You've learned something awesome. I always say that's using the tools on the tools. So now we've built that vision, we've identified the framework. We now have to look at ourselves. And if we're kind of leading the charge on this, we have to be then very self-aware and really looking at, how do I know myself? What are my blind spots? Who do I benchmark? And it's really about, once I know myself, I can then reflect and then rinse and repeat. And I want to do a quick example for you. So if you would, I would like you to find a word on this list that when you see that word, you think, oh, that best describes me. I think that's me. And just in the chat, if you would just type your number in the chat. So I see 8s and 1s and 17, 14. And what I want you to do is I want you to pay attention to the number that you've typed in and remember your number. And as I go to the next slide, I want you to find your number. Okay, so I saw a whole bunch of 12s. Okay, now I happen to be a number 5. All right, so when I do this, I pick number 5. And what self-awareness is, and when we really come back to this idea of self-awareness, there's some research out there that when we ask people if they're self-aware, it's around 90 or 95% say, yes, I'm self-aware. But actually, when you compare it, only about 5 to 10% actually are self-aware. And what happens is, as an example, I said I'm a number 5. So on the good list, I say, hey, I'm kind of persuasive. And this is how I see myself. But in this list too, this is how people see me or can see you. And so what happens is, if we don't have strong self-awareness of how we're coming across, people will see us as this negative thing. And what happens in this building a culture of improvement, I think I'm being persuasive and I'm convincing you to do something better or more efficient, but you feel manipulated. Now you have this negative flavor of what improvement is. Well, when Scott comes, he's just manipulating us to do it better or faster. And he's just doing it because the CEO or his boss said so, or whatever the situation is. Okay. Or if you're a number 10, right, you're vigilant, means you're on it and you're digging in. However, people can see that as nosy. And so the more self-aware we are, the more we can reflect and really understand who we are and how we come across to people. And it's really going through that understanding of ourselves and reflection on how I come across to go through that rinse and repeat. Because the more I understand how I'm coming across, the more I can connect with the individual or individuals that I'm working with. And the more I can connect with them on an individual level, the easier it is to get them to buy in and connect with what we're trying to do around improvement. And so I saw a couple people said, can they see the list again? So I'm just going to jump on list 1 and I'll just pause there for a moment. And then list 2. Okay, and I know those lists will be in the slides as well when Mark pushes them out as well. But again, this idea of being self-aware is crucially important to understanding how do I come across and how do I flex some of my natural states so that I come across and can connect with people to how they will understand it. And if I'm doing that really well, getting them to buy in is much stronger. And there's a number of ways, there's a number of tools and assessments to really connect that. Thanks, Mark, for throwing the slides out there. So now we've kind of gone through this. We have this vision, and we've created our framework. We're starting to be more self-aware and kind of using our EQ. Okay, that's really what we're talking about. And we now have to get into this. So how are we going to do it? So we have this framework. How are we really going to roll it out? And it's really connecting in how versus what. And if you think of like strategy and a framework, the framework is what we're trying to accomplish. Now we have to talk about how we're going to roll it out. And my favorite question that many executives talk to me about when we're working, number of clients we're working with are trying to build this culture of improvement. And the executives or the leaders will say, we've tried that before and it just didn't quite work. And or they'll say to me, hey, we want to do this process improvement program. And what I always have to tell them, number one, it's not a thing. And number two, it's not a thing. And if we treat it as a program or we treat it as a thing, it's now extra. And we're not building a culture. We're not really ingraining the thinking process of improvement into what people do day to day. And truly, Mark asked me earlier, this idea of the DMAIC way. This will sound crazy when I say it out loud. I really don't care if they ever follow DMAIC. What I really care about is, do they have a handful of tools, and when they're faced with a challenge, do they use those tools and thinking to get them to a better side? Whether or not they ever documented it on an A3, I really don't care. We documented it on an A3 so we get credit in the organization. And so then I have to say, well, is that a culture? Well, it might be a culture of getting credit, but is it a culture of improvement? And I'm not saying doing A3s is wrong, because I recommend using the A3 thinking tool. But it's really about, what do you want to happen? And so as we do this, there's really, as you kind of think about the how methodology and making it not a thing or a compliance or a check the box, it's really about we have a model, we coach to the model, and then we reflect on how did that work. And what happens ideally is we come back and say, do we have to change the model in any way? In a perfect world, and as we're maturing in this culture of improvement, we then start to say, okay, maybe how I'm coaching in that model isn't quite right, and I need to change how I coach. And so I might coach to the model, I might reflect different, I might say, I'm going to now coach differently because that person isn't connecting how I was doing it before. And so it's this little bit of a spin around that. At any time, I need to reflect and say, how does it impact the model? I need to reflect and say, how am I coaching? Am I connecting with people? I've coached probably close to about 3,000 yellow belts, green belts, and black belts in my career. And what happens is you start to see there are kind of general types of people that how you coach them, you have to flex that a little bit. For some of you, me asking you really tough, deep questions is going to help you think, and you're going to really appreciate that. Some of you, that is going to annoy you and you're going to get frustrated. So we have to take a more purposeful approach and throwing it, up on a whiteboard and talking it through with examples. And if I'm not flexing how I do that, what happens is people don't connect with it, and we're not building that culture. And so then once we've kind of hit this point, this how or what, and we're really focused on the how and understanding the model, coaching on the model, and doing that reflection, now we can get really good at the thinking process. And I know you've probably heard me say thinking process a lot. I firmly believe improvement is a thinking process. It's, yes, we may wrap it around PDSA or DMAIC or whatever it is. It's using your brain to transform what you see, what you observe, the data you get into something different or better. And many times that's part of this how. If you think about it, Mark and I were talking about, Mark measures the number of participants that come to the webinar on a control chart. And a control chart is great. It shows you, here's how we're performing, thumbs up, thumbs down, whatever that is. What we have to remember is the data does not tell us why. The data just tells us here we are. And many times leaders or executives will push back on me and they'll say, no, the data tells us all this information. And my response to them is, when you drive home today, I want you to get in your car, and I want you to sit in your car, start your car, look in your rearview mirror, and you have to drive the rest of the way home only using your rearview mirror. And no one ever wants to do that. And that's the thing about data. Data is like driving your car with the rearview mirror. It doesn't tell us forward. All it tells us is what was the past, and it just is what it is. We still have to do the thinking process to understand why. So as we move from that how, we now have to start talking about that marketing versus selling. And if we really think about this culture of improvement, we have to get the word out. And there is two very different thinking processes and approaches when we think about marketing and selling. And what we have to remember is marketing is really about positioning, branding, personas. It's strategic. Selling is tactical. Okay. And so what I love is talking with people in marketing and talking about people in sales. Sales will say, oh no, we're very strategic. No, you are tactical. Sales is really about execution, getting customers and getting more customers. And if you think about building a culture of improvement, we have to market and position why we're doing improvement and what's better on the other side and what does it look like. And hey, people like you do this and they love it. Selling is really about convincing people that we should do a project or something in their area and getting more leaders or more individuals to come to the training or to participate. It's two very different methodologies, two very different thinkings. And what happens is we think marketing is selling. And so we say, oh, we did this project, or we did 5S in this area, and look at the before and after. And, it was so great, and everyone should do 5S, or everyone should do whatever, you're touting. All of that falls into marketing. The selling is then saying, hey, here's how 5S can help you. And being very specific about that individual or that area or that department. And what happens is we think just because we put a billboard up or a sign up, everyone will want to join in. What happens is people are skeptical. If you want to in the chat, just like how many of you are enjoying the current political ads that bombard us every day? All of that is marketing. And no, this is not a political statement. It's really about they're marketing a perspective. They're trying to position one perspective over another. Selling is very, very different about getting in and understanding who your customer is, and then how do we expand that relationship in the selling process. And many times we miss this piece as improvement professionals. Is we do posters and we do all these things around the strategic and branding part. We're not doing the boots to the ground work, the tactical work to get customers or get more customers, to say, why would you want to be part of this improvement? And if I'm not doing that, I can't get to the tipping point. And really that tipping point, there is some new research, but if you read the Gladwell book around tipping point, he says I believe it's around 51%. Actually, there's new research that says it's more like 20 or 30% before you can actually get more people in the momentum to go forward. And if we're not really purposeful on that selling piece, we miss opportunity. And so the last piece is really then, we've built around the framework, et cetera. Now it's all about executing. And it's about, we have to get projects done. We have to get improvement work done. Because we can't show the benefits, people will lose belief and they won't buy in as much. And what I see many times is people will start with projects. That's a logical place to start. They'll say, hey, we're going to do this project to create standard work, or to reduce waste over in this area. We're going to 5S the storage cabinet to make it easier to find things. And the scope blossoms and we never get done. And so then leaders say, well, it doesn't work. We never can finish anything. And the thing to remember is it's really about, let's just get her done. And ideally it's really saying, how do we have progress over perfection? How do we step forward, one step forward, and then reflect on what did we do and how did that work? And really make especially your initial improvement efforts small and bite-sized. And saying, hey, we're going to do this one small thing and see how it goes, and then we're going to move on to the next thing. One small thing and then the next thing. And so it becomes really important that we just look at how are we stepping forward versus what is perfect. And we may decide that we're not going to dot all the I's and cross all the T's, because we might have 6 things that we need to do, but we find out 4 of the 6 are really what get us the better result. Why do the other 2? I believe that is waste. And what happens sometimes is we get so focused on, but we identified these 6 things and we're not doing these 6, and we get hung up on having all items, all the boxes checked, versus did it get us a better result? Cool, it did. Are we satisfied with that? Great. Let's move on. Let's go to other areas of the business. Because likely if you do those other 2, it bogs down with administrative burden. And you don't actually get the end result that you may want or could get if you just focused on those 4 key things. So I see a few questions coming in. So we have a Zoom poll that we would like you to take. And Mark, do you kick that off?
Yeah, I can kick that off.
Thank you. And so if you would just take a chance and vote on those opportunities, and I'll take a moment and review questions.
Yeah. And for those listening to the podcast, I'll just read these real quick. The question is, where do you see the biggest opportunity? And to Scott's framework, vision, framework, self-awareness, how versus what, market versus sell, and execute. And then I'll be curious as you respond to the responses, Scott, have you asked this question in other settings?
I have, yes.
How do these responses compare?
I'll answer that when I see the responses.
Yeah. Oh, I guess I need to end the poll before you see.
Yep.
Okay. It looks like the responses have dwindled down. So the top ones in terms of number of votes, self-awareness 19, execute 18, framework 17, market versus sell 16. Can you see that now, or I'm going to share results?
I can now. Yep.
Okay.
So let me just pop. I think so. Yeah. So what I typically see. So we're saying most are saying self-awareness is top. I typically see self-awareness as number 1 or number 2. I typically see marketing and then framework. And most people, when they say framework and you kind of dig into that, what they really say is they're seeing that kind of framework fatigue, where it's either too complicated or they're using multiple. I had a student that their project was actually to get to, they were going through Greenbelt, and when they assessed their organization, now this is a big healthcare system, they had 14 different frameworks across their organization. And you think about that, you're like, okay, which one do I pick today? Roll the dice. I don't know. And so when you think about kind of this and this, the self-awareness piece, really the more self-aware people can be and the more thoughtful they are about how do I interact with people, what happens is we actually connect with people in a more productive way, because I'm starting to see how I act or behave and how that impacts others. And there's actually a lot of data and science around a couple methodologies where if I can flex to meet people where they are, I actually boost engagement pretty significantly. Now, that doesn't mean you let them get away with, shortcutting or those kinds of things. It's really just understanding how do they best receive information, how do they best take action, how do they best communicate. And if I can flex more towards their style, I will actually connect with them and get my point across a lot better than I would if I didn't. And so there's a lot of power there. So no, that's awesome. So thanks everyone for taking that poll. And so then in the chat, if you would, if we look at kind of that framework, and based on a little bit of what we've talked about, where do you see the most opportunity, or what is the thing that you would say, gosh, based on what I heard today, this is where I think I need to spend a little time? So I see a couple vision. Yep. Start with vision, framework, become more self-aware. Awesome. Selling. Yep. So I see a lot of vision, a lot of selling. Yep. Someone said, oh, a little bit of everything. Awesome. Very good. So I know we're going to have some time for Q&A. I do just want to leave you quickly with a thought. And it's one of my favorite quotes that really, if once we set a culture and we want to preserve it, we have to continue to create it. And what's interesting about this quote or this idea is that building culture is really never done. We get it to a point, but we still have to put the effort to maintain it. Because if you don't create it, you're still going to have a culture. It just may not be the culture you want. And so we have to be really thoughtful about it. So I appreciate questions and the interaction so far. I know, Mark, you have a few announcements, and then we can absolutely dive into the Q&A. I see some coming in, and we'll just jump right into those after that.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. So those questions will continue coming in. We'll give people a couple of minutes. Scott, you can have a sip of water, catch your breath.
Yeah.
So I want to thank everyone for attending. This is, of course, part of an ongoing webinar series. You can register for different webinars at KaiNexus.com/webinars. If you are a KaiNexus customer, our next training team office hours with Adam and Matt is going to be October 14th and open to everybody. Our next presentation style webinar is going to be October 15th. It's titled 6 Weeks to Success: How to Double Your Output and Half Your Stress by Using 6-Week Improvement Cycles. And you'll notice it's being held at 3 p.m. Eastern. It's a little different from our standard because our presenter, Simon Murray, is in Australia. So this makes it not so early in the morning for him. It'll be early, but not middle of the night early. But if you can't attend at 3 o'clock Eastern, that will be recorded. As always, Simon is the founder of an organization called Your Maintenance Coach. And again, it's open to everybody. You can register, I would say right now, how about after this webinar? You can go to .com/webinars. Also want to tell you about a few other things. We have our on-demand webinar library. You can access that. There's a link on the right-hand sidebar of KaiNexus.com/webinars. The whole webinar library is free. You can find those also on our YouTube channel. We have a blog at blog.kinexus.com. There's actually two sub-blogs. One is our general improvement blog, and one is more customer focused with updates on the software and things like that. We also have, as I've mentioned, a podcast that includes audio. We posted, a preview of today's webinar. I had a conversation with Scott. You can go kinexus.com/podcast, or basically any place you might download and listen to podcasts. And so with that, we will go into Q&A, and you've got the iowaQC.org website and Scott's email address there. So let's see.
Yes.
There's a question here, but do you want to take them in a particular order?
Yeah, I was just going to go top to bottom is what I was thinking, Mark, unless you have a different order.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
So I think, so Julie asked, so getting people to understand the difference between quality, meeting some kind of regulatory standards, and improvement. And when you think about that question and the difference, how I've approached this, because when people blur it, it becomes confusing. Many times how I've approached this is really stepping back and saying, meeting regulatory standards, that's like table stakes. To stay in business, I have to do these things as a base. Improvement is really then saying, beyond that, what is going to add value to our organization, whether that's improving engagement with employees, whether that's reducing defects to the customer, whatever that is, that's improvement. It's doing something to push us above and beyond the minimum. And so that's typically how I have that conversation. So Julie, I hope that helps. And then Steve, you asked, you found places where organizations say you must use these tools, and they rule with the proverbial iron fist of compliance methodology within their improvement. How do you change that perspective? Tongue in cheek, I'd say, with maybe with a baseball bat, but really it's about, I would typically default to asking questions. So you have these requirements to do certain tools or a certain way. Help me understand the purpose. And once I start to understand the purpose, I'm going to look for opportunities to change their perspective, and really about asking them if their purpose is to get more people involved or to have better improvement. Are they getting the results that they want by using the mandated tools? And if they're not, then we can come to agreement that we have to do something different. Now, if they are getting the results and everything, then that's going to be a tougher sell, because if they're doing good work and they're getting great results out of their improvement projects, it's going to be a really tough sell to say, let's change something, because it's working in their mind. So I think that's a great, looks like one of the questions might have been from Sidina. I think that question might be cut off.
Well, I think if you scroll down, do you agree that coaching people to reflect, is that?
Yeah, they're there. Yeah, is individual behavior. Yes. So there are 3 growth questions that I typically use when coaching. And it's really saying what's working, what's not working, and what will you do different? And it's really then saying, how am I behaving, and how is that behavior or activity getting me to a better result? And that better result could be a better improvement process. That better result could be, gosh, I want to move up in the company, but my behavior isn't helping me accomplish that. Whatever that is, it's really saying what's working, what's not working, what am I going to go do different? And I may have some deeper questions there, based on their answers. but I'm always going to start with those reflection questions. Great question. How do you ensure buy-in as an implementer? So a team member or bring in an outsider. So of course, as a consultant, I'd say, oh, always bring in an outsider. But what I would say is, what's the appetite of the organization? And then how fast do they want to go? So if the appetite is, hey, we think, no one inside has the expertise, then you might have to kind of just swallow the pride a little bit and bring someone else in. If they're like, hey, we're patient and we can grow that expertise in-house, that's great. Many times what I recommend is the first thing before we even go is we talk about a framework, then we demonstrate it with a small group, and we'll do a yellow belt or a Kaizen event, and then report out. And typically what happens is there's one or two people who are part of that really stand out, and then you can coach them up and take it on. They're already in the organization. Going and hiring someone to fill that role is usually one of my last recommendations, because what will happen is they don't know the culture, they don't know the organization. They're going to come in with some really specific methodologies that may or may not work. Long term, you're actually better if you can grow the talent yourself. That doesn't mean you don't have a coach or a Sherpa along the way to kind of support that. And again, part of that appetite could be, do you want that coach or that consultant to be in front of the curtain or behind the curtain? Because you could have someone that never presents anything to the organization and just supports that person to get up to speed, and they are always behind the curtain to bring that person along. So people love signing up. When it comes to rolling up their sleeves, it's a challenge. Yeah. And sustaining it is even more difficult. Agree. So how do you address the issue? So really the question is, yes, we just wave a magic wand and it magically goes away. I guess I typically would address that in a couple ways. Number one, have they ever had an experience where a magic wand actually worked? Anytime in their business career. The second thing is, then I typically separate out, here's what we're going to do to get the improvement. And then there's specific actions and thinking around what are we going to do to sustain that. So we've put these changes in place. What are we now going to do to make that stick? Okay. And so I know Mark talked about, and you can see behind me, make it better, make it stick. It really is two different, very specific actions. We're going to do A, B, and C to make it better. And what do we have to do D, E, and F to make it stick? And what happens is we focus on, oh, cool, we cleaned up this area and we did standard work and we put it up, and yeehaw, it's magically going to stay that way. Yeah, that's just not how things work. We have to do some sort of follow-up, some sort of feedback to tell people, yes, you're doing great. I love this. It's wonderful. What are the best ways to encourage people to embrace core values? So if you really look at core values, it's how you want people to best behave. How I approach this is two ways. First is I define what the core values mean in as plain as English or whatever your native language is. And I say, this is what we want. And I recommend to people is you say, and here are the anti-behaviors. So here's the behaviors we want that align with the value. Here's what we don't want. And just part of that, doing that simply, most adult humans will comply and understand that once it's put in that normal English. Then the other piece I would do then is I'm going to build reward recognition, and I'm going to build any kind of feedback performance management around those core values. So I'm always keeping them front of mind and recognizing people, if trust is a core value, I'm going to do something around trust and recognize people in that way. One question: how do you manage culture of credit versus culture of improvement? Great question. If I understand culture of credit, I think what you're saying is, oh, I did this, therefore I deserve the pat on the back, or that team. And I think some of that comes from if you build, and I've been in organizations where, hey, you get 10% of whatever improvement of whatever savings you do. People get really there's friction there because it's, well, Mark thought of that first, but he just didn't take action. But I also thought of it, but second, and I took action. Well, which one of us gets the 10%? And then I get it because I took action and Mark's frustrated. So part of it is reminding people it's about us getting better together. And if it's really about credit, then it's not about, it's about me versus we. And so it's really asking that question, is it about us together or is it about I?
So Scott, follow-up question to that.
Yeah.
Does the vision help point in that direction, or is that just ongoing response and coaching that comes from leadership around points?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, Mark. Great question. I think the vision absolutely points where we're going and what we're trying to achieve. That ongoing, if you really think about the role of the executive is to remind people and to continue to coach people to be pointed towards that vision and that mission. And so I don't know that you could really have one or the other. I think it's both. Okay. There's a question in the chat about how do you get buy-in to leadership to go down this path. What I have done to get buy-in, and this goes, remember our list 1 and list 2, I was a 5, I'm persuasive, and where some people might say I'm manipulating is if I want to get leadership buy-in and I'm not quite sure that they're on board with doing a culture of improvement or going down that path, I'm going to use improvement methodologies on whatever they say is important. And when I do a great job, what they're going to come back, usually they're going to say, well, how did you do that? And then I'm going to say, well, this is how I did this. I used this methodology. And I think if we did this with all of our strategic projects, we could be so much better. And I'm going to persuade / manipulate them into going that path. So it's yes, if I'm not sure that they're on board, then I'm really going to look at how do I align my expertise and my improvement skills to deliver something they want, so I can demonstrate that approach works. Yes, sometimes centers of excellence are really not centers of improvement. How do you coach the difference? Yeah, great question. So many times I think coming back to when you think of a center of excellence, it's really about being the best of the best in that function. So you might have a center of excellence in accounting or finance and HR and etc. I think what gets lost is the center of excellence that is integrated. So I could be an excellent HR department, or I could be an excellent finance department and be firing on all cylinders, but I'm one of the most hated departments in the organization because I make it difficult to work with people or whatever that is. So I think to differentiate that, it's really about saying what is the best of the best, and then pushing them to say, okay, how do you know you're best of the best? And if they're not measuring that and comparing that, either inside the organization or outside the organization, they actually don't know that they're a center of excellence, and that should then push them to have the desire to do improvement. Yeah. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, there's two questions that are similar, so maybe we can combine.
Yeah, please.
Switching from project mindset to daily improvement, or someone else comments, we see CI as a role or only events. How do you help shift them?
Yeah. And it comes back to the how and what piece of the framework. So if you think about, most people are going to start off and they're going to do projects or they're going to do events. That is a natural place. And then you start to do those more frequently. And I think that makes sense to start at that place. It's really about saying that's what we're doing. So what we do is we do a project or we do a Kaizen event or whatever your methodology is. Then it's saying our goal is to make this how we do our work. And so it's saying, how are the people who went to the Kaizen event or did a project, how are they then using those tools and thinking in their everyday work? Because they experience everyday problems that they don't think about or they don't take action on. And they just deal with it. So it's really about two things, I think. One is teaching them to see things differently, but then challenging to say, how do we do that work? And most of the time what I find is it's shifting leaders' methodologies to approach problem solving to be more of a coach and asking questions that align with, the methodology that you want. Toyota Kata is great. If you look at really what are they after, they're after leaders asking those questions to say, what have you learned today? What's not working? How have you approached? And it's really driving people to use that improvement thinking process in their day-to-day work. So if you kind of model some things after that, I believe that's how you can kind of shift from that project or event focus to daily focus.
We've got time maybe for one more. What do you?
Yeah, sure.
The list of questions.
So if I look, I see one. How do you build trust and buy-in when you have long tenured employees that they've seen it all? And sometimes they maybe just hasn't gone as smoothly as they like. I'm paraphrasing the question. Yeah. So there's 4 steps that I typically use, and really I find it frequently with long tenured employees. When they say, we've tried this before, we've been there, done that. I have been told, hey, you're just like everyone else. Flavor of the month. You too shall pass. I've outlasted all them. I'll outlast you. Cool. Thank you. Appreciate that vote of confidence. And what I will typically go to is I'll just ask them, hey, do we agree we can get better? Like there's things that are kind of a pain in the butt. I might even use the word, are there things that suck about your job? And they'll typically say, yes. I'm going to say, excellent. I think there are too. And then once I get agreement that there is some kind of problem, then I'm going to go to the next step. What are those issues? And they're going to say, well, this is terrible, and this is terrible, and this has never worked. And anytime I push this button on the machine, it's supposed to light up and shoot fireworks, but it never does. Now we can agree that what the problem is. Then I'm going to side by side work with them and demonstrate how this methodology can make their life better. And I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it in a very super informal way. And I'm going to look for as quick of wins as I can. And I think about the one time somebody told me an extruder screw, they were supposed to have the ability to change the resistance to make the screw go a little faster, a little slower. And apparently it hadn't worked for like 5 years. And the operators were frustrated and they say, 10 people have looked at it. And I just went and found an electrician I knew and trusted. And I said, hey, here's the situation. What's going on? Well, yeah, no one's ever authorized us to buy this part. And I'm like, how much? $50. Cool. Here is my car. Here's my credit card. Let's go buy the part. And they're like, cool. And just that little simple thing, they were bought in. And so I think it's really just about, you have to prove it to them. I'm not saying that's right. I think that's just kind of what it is. I know we didn't get to all the questions, so I do apologize for that. But great questions.
Yeah, and I can send you that list if you maybe want to answer any of those.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Scott. So I want to thank everybody for being here, and most everybody stayed on through the Q&A, so thank you for that. We want to, again, thank our presenter, Scott Bergmeyer from IQC. There's a deviation from standard where I didn't mistype it on the very first slide, but it says executive directory instead of executive director. So I apologize for that.
Yeah, it's all good.
We'll pull the end on cord and own up to my mistake. But
all good.
Scott, thank you for a really engaging session. I think it was really thought-provoking to have a framework like that.
Yeah.
To think through what we're doing with continuous improvement, or really anything that an organization is trying to implement.
Yeah. Yep.
So thank you for that.
No problem. No, it was great. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much. And again, everyone, you will be getting a recording tomorrow, and we hope you'll sign up for future webinars. Again, kinexus.com/webinars. Have a great day, Scott. Thanks again.
All right. Have a good one. See y'all.